Hello, everybody. This is Professor Hankinson, and this is the first lecture of two for topic two, where we look at the public policy process. So, what are we going to be looking at in this lecture? Well, in this lecture, we're going to be defining some key terms. Since this is a class in political science as well as gender studies, I want to make sure that we're all on sort of equal footing when it comes to understanding key terms from American government as well as how the American government is organized. The vast majority of people who are taking this class are taking it under the GSW designator. Um, and so I just want to make sure that we're all understanding American government and how it's organized. And for those of you who are taking it as political science, you can always use a refresher. So, and then we're going to take a look at what public policy is. So we'll start sort of big by taking a look at American government, and then we'll get more specific as we define public policy, and then ask and answer why we should study public policy. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's define some key terms. The reason we're doing this too is not just to make sure that everybody understands the organization of American government, but since you're going to be studying public policy, and public policy is a product of the American governmental institutions, it's also a product of politics. That what we're going to be learning about this semester will make a lot more sense if we understand and define key terms and understand how the government is organized. All right, so what is government? Well, when we talk about government, we're talking about institutions, okay? And so government are the institutions and the procedures through which a territory and its people are ruled. And that comes from the American government text book I use, We the People. And so when you're talking about government, you're actually talking about the institutions that are that rule over us. And so as we're going to see in a little bit, we have specific institutions. But no matter what kind of government that you are a part of, we have an institution that makes decisions. We have an institution that takes those decisions and puts those into action. And then we have an institution that when there's a disagreement about the law, the decision that's been made, and the way that it's been implemented, that we have an institution that settles those disputes. That's known as the judiciary. And so public policy is all about the institutions, and institutions are a part of government. Now, in the United States, we live in this thing called a constitutional democracy. And what a constitutional democracy is, it's two things. One thing is that democracy means rule of the people, okay? Kratos is from the Greek to rule. Demos is Greek for the people. And so in the United States, we're a democracy, and y'all know this, the people do the ruling. Now, we don't directly do the ruling when we are making a decision about whether we should go to war or raise taxes or provide federal funding for abortion, what have you. We don't ask everybody in the United States, how would you vote on that, yes or no, and then do what the people want. We live in a particular type of democracy, and that's known as a republic, or a representative form of democracy. So in our democracy, the thing that people do is they elect people that make decisions for us. And if we don't like the decisions that they make, then we don't vote for them the next time. So democracy, broadly defined, is that the political authority ultimately rests in the hands of the people. So even though we may not be voting directly on things, that we do have the political authority because we are basically electing those who do make the decisions, and we have the authority to get rid of them if we don't like them. We're also a constitutional democracy, and what that means is that our government is created by a constitution, and that's what the United States Constitution is. It's basically the blueprint for our institutions of government, among other things that are in the Constitution. And it tells government what it can do, but it also tells government what it can't do. And so a constitutionally based government is that the powers of the government are limited by the Constitution and federal law, just as the people in that government are subject to the rule of law. So is the government itself, and that the government is limited by the powers that are granted to it in the Constitution. And if the government exceeds its authorized powers, there's a consequence for that. And the consequence for that is they can be sued, and then the Supreme Court can rule whether or not that overreach of their power is in fact unconstitutional. They don't have the power to do that. And so government and constitutional democracy sort of go hand in hand. Okay, so one of the key aspects of understanding how American government is structured is the concept of separation of powers. What separation of powers is it's where each individual institution within government is given a specific set of powers. And they are only authorized to exercise those powers if and they are not authorized to exercise power that is granted to another institution. Our framers separated power out that way in our Constitution because they were really concerned about people abusing power. They knew that all humans were not angels. They knew that humans were humans, and humans will abuse power. Some will abuse power if they are given the opportunity to do so. And so they felt that one good way of checking abuse of powers was to diffuse powers into different institutions. If you have all the powers in the hands of one institution, well, if that institution is cool with abusing powers, nobody's going to sort of check that abuse of power. It also makes it more difficult for the people to check the power because so much power is in the hands of one institution. They also thought by separating powers into separate institutions that each institution would sort of push back on the other institution if an institution was trying to like get into their like power zone. So, for example, if the legislature did something other than make decisions and pass laws, and let's say the legislature tried to rule on the constitutionality of laws, well, the judiciary would push back and say, dudes, get back into your zone because you make laws, but you do not determine whether those laws are constitutional or not. And so the thinking behind the separation of powers is one that is trying to keep the abuse of power at bay. The way our government is organized in the United States, both at the national level, but we see this at the state levels as well, is a reflection of that principle of separation of powers. And so we have one institution, it's the legislature. It makes decisions, okay? And so, that's another way of saying that they make law. And our legislature is in this thing called the United States Congress. A further way that the framers, diffused power was by creating a U.S. Congress that was bicameral. That means that there are two chambers within the Congress. And so the one chamber is known as the U.S. House of Representatives, and the other chamber is known as the U.S. Senate. They have different terms of office. Members of the House serve for 2 years, and they're reelected every 2 years. They're very closely connected then to their districts because they're constantly up for reelection. The Senate is different. Senators serve for a longer term. They serve for 6 years. And so they are a little bit more detached from the voice or the will of the people since they have a longer term of office. The House of Representatives, as most of you know, is based on population. So the larger that your state is in terms of population, the more representatives you get in the House of Representatives. The Senate is different. Every state gets 2 senators, regardless of how populous or not populous you are. So California, which has a huge population, is the most populous state, gets 2 senators. But so does Wyoming, which has about 500,000 people live in Wyoming. They get 2 senators too. Again, there was a method to the madness of this, that they didn't want everything based on population. The framers didn't want everything based on population because they feared tyranny of the majority. And so that sometimes it's good that where one house gets a little bit more say in order to push back on the tyranny of the majority rule. The other branch that we have so the legislature makes decisions, it passes law. The executive branch puts those laws into action. Okay, it executes the laws. And our executive branch is comprised of two things, two sub institutions, I guess. One is the presidency, and so that's the president of the United States and their immediate staff, their cabinet, the people that work to help the president be able to do his job. And the other is what's known as the federal bureaucracy. That's not in the Constitution, but that is an institution that developed as a result of the federal law. And what the federal bureaucracy is that we have different departments like the Department of Defense, the Department of State, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Justice Department, the Department of Justice. There are 15 altogether. And what these different departments do is that once the law is passed and signed into law by the president, it's really the department's job to actually implement and execute those laws. Okay. And we're going to see how that plays out in the next lecture when we take a look at like the public policy process and how policy is implemented. The third institution of government is the judiciary. And the judiciary settles disputes. If there's a dispute over, let's say, whether or not somebody violated a law, like, hey, you've committed a crime, that conflict is settled in the judiciary. The judiciary will determine whether or not the individual accused of a crime is in fact guilty as charged. But there are other kinds of disputes that revolve around law as well, and those disputes have to do with the constitutionality of the law and also the constitutionality of the way the law is implemented. The federal judiciary is made up of the United States Supreme Court and its 9 justices, and we're going to be focusing on constitutional law as it relates to gender in the topic 3. And there are also a series of federal lower level courts, trial courts, and lower level appellate courts. But that's what the judiciary does. It settles the disputes that arise out of the other 2 branches. The final concept I want you to keep in mind is checks and balances. And so while power is separated, that no branch can really do its job without the oversight and participation of another branch. Okay. So for example, the legislature passes laws, but then the president signs those laws. It actually enacts those laws through their signature. That the president may nominate justices to serve on the Supreme Court, but the Senate confirms those nominations. Again, it's another way of checking abuses on power. The more people or more institutions that are involved in decision making, the more likely that there's going to be oversight and pushback when power is being abused. All right, let's turn our sights now to another key term, public policy, and how public policy is defined. Well, this week you'll be reading a chapter from a public policy book, a PDF, and you will find that link in the topic 2 readings for the week. It's listed on our course calendar, but you cannot access it through there. So make sure that you access it through the Canvas site itself. And the person who wrote that book that you're reading the chapter from, he's a political scientist, and his name is Thomas Dye. And I love his definition of public policy because it's like so like almost kind of vague, but it's really true that public policy is whatever governments choose to do or to not do, right? It's the actions that government takes to address a perceived problem. And public policy is if there's a perceived problem, but that the government doesn't view it as a problem, or maybe they view it as a problem, but they think that it's too politically contentious to do anything about that problem, they don't take any action, okay? So, throughout the course of the semester, we're going to be looking at the ways in which governments see a problem and then try to do something about it, or see a problem and don't do anything about it, right? And so, what government does or doesn't do falls into broad categories. And so let's just take a moment to look at the categories of the actions that government take via public policy, and then we'll look at them with through the lens of gender and public policy. One thing that government does, decisions that government make, policies, are they regulate behavior. They basically, in saying that certain kind of behavior is prohibited, then it's telling people that if you could engage in this behavior, but there's a consequence for engaging in that behavior. And so most people will not engage in that behavior. Murder, good example, right? Most of us are just sitting in our house waiting to murder, but we don't murder because you're going to get in trouble for it. That's kind of a joke, right? I mean, sometimes you don't need to regulate behavior because most people aren't sitting in their house thinking about murdering others, right? But it's a good example of a regulation of behavior. Here's some two examples of regulated behavior as it relates to the study of gender. So sexual assault. Sexual assault is basically harming someone in a sexual manner. Could range from as something seemingly minor as an unwanted kiss or an unwanted grope. I'm not minimizing that. Those are not unharmful things. But then it can go as far as a forcible rape, right? Sexual assault. We're going to be learning about it. And we have laws on the books, public policy that addresses sexual assault. We're going to be learning in this class about how sexual assault policy has changed over time. It used to really be very difficult to charge somebody with sexual assault because of the way that sexual assault and rape were defined. In fact, when it came to forcibly raping your wife, the law said that you really couldn't rape your wife, right? You couldn't be charged with sexual assault against your wife because your wife was your property. That's obviously changed over time, but you'd be surprised that those laws stayed on the books until the 1970s. But again, it's regulating behavior, right? People, get in trouble for engaging in that behavior. Abortion, whether or not you can have an abortion, regulates behavior, right? If you can have an abortion, then you can seek one out if you want to terminate a pregnancy. If an abortion is criminalized, that regulates behavior because it's that you will get in trouble for engaging in that kind of action. A public policy can organize society. Good gendered examples of that are that it organizes societies in telling us how we can group together and whether or not the government is going to recognize those groupings. And so, marriage, who can get married, who cannot be legally married, what benefits you get under marriage. It organizes our society. Adoption, family, right? Family custody, who can have custody of the kids. All of those are ways in which we organize our societies. Because if it is incredibly difficult to get a divorce or impossible, then societies are organized in a way where marriages could be very unhappy and potentially dangerous. If we allow for divorces then and allow for easier remarriage, then that organizes societies into these more plural and diverse family units. Conferring benefits such as WIC, that is a financial benefit that one would get if they're under a certain income and they have children or infants. You can get subsidies to buy good and healthy food for your kids. Badger Care covers children and pregnant women. And the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, confers a benefit because the Affordable Care Act says that contraceptives must be covered by all health insurance, and that's a benefit because you don't have to pay extra for it. And that money can be extracted and money is distributed through taxation. And so that taxes can be used for all sorts of purposes. But a good example about that is sort of gender is the public policies about people having to pay child support and also people having to pay alimony, which is if you get a divorce, that the one party may be responsible for paying the other party alimony for an extended period of time. So those are just some examples of what governments choose to do or not do. The next slides that we're going to take a look at in the next lecture, we're going to go into more detail about seeing policymaking as a political process. And this also relates to another key term. So, public policy is not made in a vacuum. When government passes a law to address a perceived issue, it's not doing that without the influence of other elements within society. Policy is a reflection of politics, okay? And to understand what that means, let's take a look at a definition again from my American government textbook about how politics is defined. Politics is struggling for power, basically. And that what we struggle over is that we struggle for power for over who is going to lead us, who's going to be our senators, who's going to be our representatives, who's going to be our president. We struggle over how government is going to be structured. We don't do that as much anymore, but back in the day when we were crafting our Constitution, there was a huge struggle, a political struggle over how the legislature would be organized. And we struggle over what policies we think government should enact, okay? Should government pass policies that prohibit sex discrimination in the workplace, or should government not do that, right? That's not an appropriate sort of realm for government to ensure that there's no discrimination. And so politics is that struggle for power, the conflict over the leadership, structure, and policies of government. And the groups that have the most power, the groups that are able to persuade, are those who are going to be able to enact their policies. When you win in the struggle over who's going to lead us, that means that the group that had the most votes elects the president, and then the president has, consequences for the policymaking and the decisions that government makes. And so public policy is a reflection of that. It's a reflection of the values in the historical context that we live in. And so that if the values that we have as a nation are that there's big differences between men and women and that they should be treated differently, and that women are sort of the fairer sex and needs a lot of protection, that those values in society are likely to going to play themselves out in the political arena, and that people will get elected that reflect those values and that spring forth from that historical context. If we have values that women and men should be treated equally and that no gender discrimination is justified, or very few limited gender distinctions and discriminations are justified, well, then that's going to be the that's going to be the viewpoint that is going to have the power to elect people to office. So public policy is a reflection of politics because politics is a reflection of the values in the historical context of the time. Gender norms, right? That women should be protected or women should be treated equally. It's also about who has the power, okay, within society, both political power and social power. And so you can sort of think about that in terms of that public policy is the decisions that government make. Well, some people aren't allowed to participate in government, right? And so initially African Americans weren't even seen as citizens. They were seen as property. That changes after the Civil War. Even after slavery is ended, that took several years for African Americans to get the right to vote, and then it was only men who had the right to vote. And as we know, that just because we had a constitutional amendment that gave men the right to vote, African American men the right to vote, or African Americans the right to vote, it took until 1964 to actually realize that. And as we know, women didn't get the right to vote until 1920, and that thus making it, and there were legal prohibitions for running for office, et cetera, et cetera. And so who has political and social power is reflected in the policies that are made. And so, again, policy is not made in a vacuum. All right, so let's close this lecture out by looking at reasons why to study public policy. And you'll see these reflected in more detail in the chapter readings for this week. Um, so, one good reason for studying public policy is that you can learn what government is doing, okay? And you're actually going to be writing 2 public policy papers that give you the opportunity to learn about what government is doing in relationship to sex and gender. Public policy are actions that government take, and when you learn about public policy, you learn about what decisions government decided to take in order to address a perceived problem. We can also, the a good reason for studying public policy is to figure out why government did what it did, why government is doing what it's doing. Is it doing what it's doing because social context and historical context has changed? Has society changed their understanding of like gender norms, and they're demanding that government respond to that? Is government doing what it's doing because new people are in power? Is government different when more Democrats are in power than Republicans are in power? Is government different when you have more diversity in the lawmaking branch, more women, more people of color? Is that what is causing it? Is the cause of it public protests, direct action that government is responding to, etc.? Learning and studying public policy gives you an opportunity to know why government is doing what it's doing. And then finally, a good reason to study public policy is because then we can also look at the impact of the public policy once it's been enacted. And so, what are the consequences of the policy that's been enacted? Is it effectively addressing the problem? If not, why? What changes need to be made to make it so that the policy more effectively addresses the problem? And again, in a nutshell, that's kind of what your paper is doing, right? Sort of describes current public policy, looks at why the government decided to do that public policy. It analyzes the public policy to see where it falls short, and then it makes suggestions for how to improve public policy by offering policy options. All right, so that's it. Public policy in American government, a little refresher, and more than a refresher as we're moving into what we'll be covering in our next lecture is the process. One of the models that helps us understand how public policy is made is what's known as the public policy process. And so we'll take a look at that next. Thanks a lot for listening. Talk to you soon.